Yep, strong signal.
That's a strong signal there, Melissa.
Yeah, it is. This will be the first snake that's going to get a GPS tag put in it. That's going to fill in the gaps for what the snake's doing in between when we track her using the tried and true traditional VHF tags.
Deep in the Everglades, where GPS signals flicker between life and absence, a tagged Burmese python simply stopped moving. Just a single frozen coordinate in one of North America's most hostile and impenetrable wetlands. When researchers finally reached the location, they found that the 13-foot invasive apex predator was lifeless.
Over 50 pounds and 13 feet long, but dead, buried under the brush. Somehow, something killed this apex predator.
Very quickly, we figured out he's dead. This is a crime scene.
What took down this apex python is unthinkable. But there's more to this story. We'll start from the very beginning and also shed light on what happened after the tracker went silent in the Everglades. When Burmese pythons invaded Florida. In the 1970s, Florida's exotic pet trade was already booming quietly in the background of a rapidly growing state, where imported reptiles were becoming status symbols in suburban homes and private collections. Among them were Burmese pythons, or Python bivitatus, native to Southeast Asia, sold as harmless juveniles barely longer than a ruler. At that stage, few buyers understood what they were really bringing home. When fully grown, the serpent could reach lengths of 3 to 6 meters, or 10 to 20 feet. Some specimens in Florida even exceeded 6.1 meters, or 20 feet. In controlled conditions, these snakes could consume prey larger than a house cat and survive months without food. This made them efficient survivors, but disastrous escape risks in a non-native environment. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, Florida had already become one of the largest entry points for exotic wildlife in the United States, with Miami-Dade County functioning as a central hub for importers, breeders, and reptile wholesalers. Small-scale escapes were inevitable. Some snakes slipped out of poorly secured enclosures. Others were released by owners who could no longer manage their size. At the time, these were isolated incidents, but it all changed in August 1992. Hurricane Andrew struck South Florida as a Category 5 storm with sustained winds exceeding 265 kilometers per hour or 165 miles per hour. One of the most significant ecological consequences of the hurricane was not immediately visible in human casualty reports or infrastructure damage, but in the collapse of containment systems for captive wildlife. A major reptile breeding facility in the Homestead area was destroyed, releasing hundreds, possibly thousands of captive Burmese pythons and other reptiles into surrounding wetlands in a single night. The exact number was never fully confirmed, but wildlife biologists consistently identify this event as a critical acceleration point in the establishment of wild python populations. Within a decade of Hurricane Andrew, early field surveys began detecting breeding populations of Burmese pythons deep within Everglades National Park. By the early 2000s, researchers from agencies such as the U.S. Geological Survey confirmed that the species was no longer sporadically present, but fully established and reproducing in the wild. Nesting females were documented laying clutches of 20 to 100 eggs, with survival rates high enough to sustain exponential population growth in a predator-rich but python-naive ecosystem. Unlike many invasive species that struggle with reproduction outside their native range, Burmese pythons thrived in Florida's warm, humid climate, which closely mirrored the environmental conditions of Southeast Asia. What made the invasion particularly difficult to detect in its early stages was the Everglades itself. Unlike forests or grasslands, the Everglades is a slow-moving wetland system where visibility is limited, terrain is unstable, and much of the wildlife exists below dense vegetation or submerged in shallow water. Pythons, which rely on ambush hunting and remain motionless for long periods, effectively disappeared into this environment. Even as their population expanded, direct sightings remained rare, allowing them to spread for years before ecological monitoring fully registered their presence. But soon enough, their presence became impossible to ignore. Ecological expansion and measured wildlife collapse. By the early 2000s, the U.S. Geological Survey, or USGS, working alongside Everglades National Park biologists, began structured long-term road surveys designed to track mammal populations across fixed routes in southern Florida. Along standard survey routes used since the 1990s, researchers began noticing a collapse in mammal detections. By comparing pre-invasion baseline data with post-2000 surveys, a pattern emerged that was too consistent to dismiss as natural fluctuation. Between 2003 and 2011, some of the most heavily invaded regions of the southern Everglades showed mammal detection drops so extreme that they were classified as ecological anomalies. Raccoons, once one of the most commonly recorded mammals in Everglades roadside surveys, showed declines reaching up to approximately 99% in certain python-dense zones. In practical terms, this meant that areas which previously recorded regular raccoon sightings every few kilometers would go entire survey seasons without a single confirmed observation. Marsh rabbits, a key herbivorous species in the wetland food web, declined by more than 90% in southern monitoring datasets, particularly in regions where python presence was consistently confirmed through trapping and telemetry. Opossums and foxes followed a similar trajectory, though with an even more unsettling pattern, not just decline, but near functional disappearance in multiple sampling grids. Functional disappearance, in ecological terms, does not necessarily mean absolute extinction, but rather that populations fall below the threshold where they play a meaningful ecological role, or are reliably detectable through standardized sampling. In several Everglades survey sectors, these species effectively vanished from routine detection frameworks entirely. What made these declines scientifically significant was their spatial alignment with python presence. USGS researchers observed a clear geographic correlation. Areas with high densities of Burmese pythons consistently overlapped with the steepest declines in native mammal detections. In contrast, reference zones farther north, where pythons were absent or rare, did not show comparable declines during the same time period. This spatial contrast helped rule out broader environmental factors such as drought cycles or disease outbreaks as primary drivers. The mechanism behind this collapse was inferred through dietary and field evidence. Stomach content analysis of captured pythons revealed a broad prey base dominated by medium-sized mammals, including raccoons, marsh rabbits, and small deer. Combined with camera trap studies and radiotelemetry of tagged snakes, researchers concluded that pythons were exerting strong top-down predation pressure on multiple trophic levels. Unlike native predators, which typically regulate one or two prey species within a balanced ecosystem, pythons functioned as generalist apex predators capable of consuming nearly any suitably sized vertebrate. As the data accumulated, USGS scientists began to frame the phenomenon not as isolated predation events, but as a systemic ecological shift. They called it a trophic cascade disruption, describing a top-down collapse of the small mammal food web triggered by the introduction of a novel apex predator. Between 2003 and 2011, one of the most striking datasets came from Everglades National Park road surveys, where standardized vehicle transects recorded wildlife encounters under consistent conditions. Where once mammal detections were frequent and diverse, post-2000 surveys increasingly recorded long stretches of road with zero mammal sightings at all. At the same time, researchers noted that bird and reptile populations did not show identical collapse patterns. Field ecologists working in the region also reported secondary behavioral changes in surviving species. Some mammals shifted activity patterns toward more fragmented or nocturnal behavior, likely as an adaptive response to ambush predation pressure. However, these behavioral adjustments did not reverse the overall population declines. In many cases, they simply delayed detection by standard survey methods, creating the illusion of temporary stability before deeper declines were confirmed. By the late 2000s, the Everglades had effectively become a patchwork ecosystem under uneven pressure. Some regions still supported moderate mammal activity, particularly in northern transition zones where python density remained low. But in the southern core, especially within Everglades National Park boundaries and adjacent conservation lands, the food web had visibly thinned. apex mammal predators like bobcats remained present, but their prey base had contracted significantly, forcing shifts in territory size and hunting behavior. But why? How come this foreign reptile took over the entire ecosystem? Python biology and invasion advantage. In the Everglades, the Burmese python does not behave like an ordinary predator. Native to the tropical forests and wetlands of Southeast Asia, Python bivitatus evolved in environments where prey availability fluctuates heavily with monsoon cycles. That evolutionary pressure shaped a body capable of extreme flexibility in feeding, metabolism, and survival. This makes them perfectly suited for dominating the Everglades. Burmese pythons are constrictors, meaning they kill prey not through venom or speed, but by wrapping coils of muscle around the victim and applying sustained pressure until circulation and respiration fail. Once the prey is immobilized, the snake begins a swallowing process made possible by an unusually engineered skull structure. Unlike mammals, a python's jaw is not rigidly fused. Instead, it is connected by elastic ligaments that allow each side of the jaw to move independently. This adaptation, combined with highly flexible skin and expandable connective tissue, allows ingestion of prey far larger than the snake's head diameter. In Florida, based on field studies and stomach content analyses conducted by wildlife agencies, Burmese pythons have been documented consuming a wide range of vertebrates, including raccoons, marsh rabbits, wading birds, and white-tailed deer fawns. In some cases, entire deer have been confirmed as prey items in large individuals exceeding 4 meters in length. Within approximately 48 hours of consuming a large meal, their internal organs undergo rapid remodeling. Scientific studies have recorded a heart mass increase of roughly 40% during digestion, a temporary adaptation that supports the enormous metabolic demand of processing large prey. The intestinal tract also expands significantly, increasing surface area for nutrient absorption before gradually returning to baseline once digestion is complete. This system is paired with another survival advantage that directly enhances invasion success: prolonged fasting capability. After consuming a large prey item, a Burmese python can survive anywhere from 3 to 6 months, or in some cases longer, without feeding again. During this period, its metabolic rate drops dramatically, allowing it to conserve energy while remaining almost entirely inactive. In the Everglades, this means a python can disappear into dense vegetation or submerged wetlands and remain undetectable for extended periods, resurfacing only when environmental conditions or hunger trigger movement. Digestive efficiency is another critical component of its invasive advantage. Burmese pythons produce highly potent gastric acids and enzymes capable of breaking down not just muscle tissue, but also bone and connective structures within days. Prey is effectively liquefied into absorbable nutrients, leaving minimal waste. This allows the snake to maximize energy extraction from each feeding event, reducing the need for frequent hunting and further lowering detection probability in the wild. Movement ecology also plays a significant role in their success. Burmese pythons are semi-aquatic, capable of navigating both terrestrial and aquatic environments with equal efficiency. In the Everglades, this dual mobility is particularly powerful. Water channels, marshes, and sawgrass plains form a continuous habitat network where the snake can travel long distances while remaining partially submerged or concealed. Unlike many terrestrial predators that leave clear trails or territorial markers, pythons move through water and vegetation in ways that leave little persistent evidence, making tracking extremely difficult even for trained researchers. Their hunting strategy compounds this invisibility. Rather than actively chasing prey, Burmese pythons rely on ambush predation. They remain motionless for extended periods, often coiled near animal trails, water edges, or thermal transition zones where prey is likely to pass. Using heat-sensing pits located along their upper jaws, they can detect infrared radiation emitted by warm-blooded animals, allowing them to strike with precision even in low-visibility conditions, such as night or dense foliage.
Pythons rely heavily on their sense of smell to locate and track their prey. Despite their size, They can strike with lightning speed when a potential meal is in range.
This sensory system effectively turns the environment into a passive detection grid, where movement becomes the trigger for attack. From a population perspective, estimating python numbers in Florida is notoriously difficult due to their cryptic behavior and the vastness of their habitat. Agencies such as the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, or FWC, and the U.S. Geological Survey have consistently emphasized uncertainty. Published figures typically range from tens of thousands to potentially over 100,000 individuals, with some broader models extending upper estimates to around 300,000. This uncertainty itself highlights another key aspect of their biological advantage: detectability bias. Unlike species that rely on frequent movement or social grouping, Burmese pythons can remain stationary for long periods, often blending into environmental textures that make visual identification nearly impossible. Juveniles can remain hidden in dense vegetation, while adults can occupy submerged or concealed positions that evade standard survey methods. Even advanced detection techniques, such as radiotelemetry and environmental DNA sampling, only capture fragments of the full population structure. Reproductive capacity further strengthens their invasion profile. Female Burmese pythons are capable of laying large clutches, often ranging from 20 to over 100 eggs per breeding cycle. In favorable conditions, reproductive output can sustain population growth even under significant removal pressure. Females also exhibit maternal incubation behavior, coiling around egg clutches to regulate temperature, a rare trait among reptiles that increases hatchling survival rates in unstable environments. Naturally, the Burmese pythons have succeeded in invading the Everglades, but naturally, there has to be some friction with the established predators. Predator interactions and emerging ecological pressure. Native predators, many of them evolutionarily unchanged for thousands of years, were suddenly forced into direct and unpredictable contact with a new apex competitor. The most significant of these encounters involved the American alligator, or Alligator mississippiensis, a species that has dominated the Everglades long before modern human settlement. Adult alligators can exceed 4 meters or 13 feet in length and are among the most powerful native predators in North America. Early field observations in the 2000s confirmed that alligators were not passive observers of the python invasion. Instead, they were actively engaging with it, sometimes as predators, sometimes as prey. Documented interactions showed a clear size-dependent reversal of roles. Smaller pythons, particularly juveniles and subadults, were occasionally consumed by large adult alligators. These predation events typically occurred in shallow water environments where ambush dynamics favored the gator's explosive bite force. However, as Burmese pythons reached larger sizes, particularly individuals exceeding 3.5 to 4 meters, the interaction shifted into a dangerous overlap. Either species could become the dominant predator. In several recorded field observations, large Burmese pythons were documented preying on juvenile alligators. Hatchling and juvenile alligators are vulnerable to constriction, and in shallow wetland margins, pythons have been observed coiling around young gators before submerging with them. The most dramatic interactions, however, occur when size parity is closer. Field biologists in the Everglades have documented multiple encounters where adult alligators and large Burmese pythons engaged in lethal combat. One of the defining behaviors observed in these clashes is the alligator's death roll, a rotational maneuver used to disorient prey and tear apart resisting animals through torque and sheer force. In documented cases, alligators have used this technique against pythons, attempting to break the snake's grip or spine through repeated rotational force. Conversely, pythons rely on constriction, attempting to immobilize the gator by restricting airflow and blood circulation. Though success rates in such encounters are highly variable and strongly size-dependent. These interactions have been captured through a combination of field observation, trail cameras, and opportunistic recordings in Everglades National Park and surrounding wetlands. Importantly, neither species holds consistent dominance over the other. Beyond reptiles, avian predators have also entered the ecological response to python expansion. though at a completely different scale. Camera trap studies and nesting area observations have documented herons, hawks, and other large wading birds targeting juvenile Burmese pythons. These interactions are most frequently recorded near nesting sites or shallow wetland margins where hatchling snakes are vulnerable and still within the size range of avian predation. Great blue herons, for example, possess long, spear-like bills capable of delivering precise strikes to small vertebrate prey. In documented instances, these birds have been observed capturing juvenile pythons and striking them repeatedly to immobilize them before swallowing. Similarly, red-shouldered hawks and other raptors have been recorded taking advantage of exposed hatchlings, particularly during seasonal hatching periods. Among mammalian interactions, the most notable observations come from bobcats, lynx rufus, and, more rarely, black bears, Ursus americanus floridanus. USGS-linked field reports and camera trap evidence have documented occasional bobcat attacks on subadult Burmese pythons. These encounters are not common, but they demonstrate opportunistic predation behavior under specific conditions, typically when a python is exposed, stationary, or thermally disadvantaged. One widely reported case involved a tagged python carcass later associated with bobcat activity, marking one of the few documented instances of a mammal engaging directly with an adult-sized python in a lethal context. Black bear interactions are even less frequent, but have been recorded in field observations as brief, confrontational encounters or opportunistic feeding events on smaller pythons. Bears in South Florida are not primary wetland predators, and their overlap with python habitats is limited. All of this, however, has failed to stop the infestation. The pythons are too numerous and too well adapted to be stopped. Monitoring and human control efforts. By the mid-2000s, Florida's Burmese python problem had shifted from a quiet ecological anomaly into a visible management crisis. What once moved unnoticed through the Everglades was now the focus of coordinated state agencies, federal researchers, and an expanding network of trained hunters.
You can help the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission limit the impact of Burmese pythons by participating in the 2013 Python Challenge.
One of the most public-facing control efforts began in 2013 with the launch of the Florida Python Challenge, organized by the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, or FWC, and the South Florida Water Management District. The program was structured as a competitive removal event, typically running for about 10 days in summer, where participants from across the country competed to capture and humanely euthanize Burmese pythons. The goal was both practical and psychological: reduce snake numbers while increasing public awareness of how deeply established the invasion had become. Participation numbers illustrate the scale of engagement. In early editions, hundreds of hunters registered, with later events attracting over 1,000 participants from multiple states. Prize structures were introduced to incentivize removal, with awards for the longest python and the highest number captured. Despite the attention, the total number of snakes removed during these events typically remained in the low hundreds, a fraction of the estimated population spread across thousands of square kilometers of wetlands. Parallel to public hunting efforts, scientists and wildlife managers developed more targeted techniques, one of the most notable being the so-called Judas snake program. This method involved capturing male Burmese pythons, fitting them with radio transmitters, and releasing them back into the wild. During breeding season, these tagged males would instinctively seek out females, effectively leading researchers to otherwise hidden reproductive aggregations. The approach was based on behavioral ecology. Pythons are solitary most of the year, but aggregate during mating periods, particularly in winter months. By tracking a single male's movements, field teams could locate multiple snakes in one operation, increasing efficiency in a system where direct detection is extremely difficult. This method, while effective in localized contexts, is labor-intensive and limited by terrain, signal loss, and the sheer spatial scale of the Everglades. As removal and tracking efforts expanded, researchers also began deploying a more technologically advanced tool: environmental DNA, or eDNA sampling. This method does not require visual confirmation of the animal. Instead, water samples are collected from canals, marshes, and wetlands, and analyzed for trace genetic material shed by organisms through skin cells, waste, or residue. In Florida's wetland systems, eDNA has become particularly valuable because it allows researchers to detect the presence of Burmese pythons even when the animals themselves are not observed. This is critical in a landscape where dense vegetation, deep water channels, and nocturnal behavior make direct sightings rare. While eDNA does not provide exact population counts, it can confirm presence or absence in a given area, helping to refine removal targeting strategies. Despite these innovations, the scale of removal remains modest relative to the suspected population. Data from FWC contractor programs and state-supported removal initiatives indicate that trained professionals and authorized hunters collectively remove hundreds to just over 1,000 pythons per year during peak operational periods. These numbers fluctuate depending on funding, seasonal conditions, and program intensity, but they consistently fall far below estimates of total population size, which are widely believed to range from tens of thousands to potentially over 100,000 individuals across South Florida. The difficulty is not simply effort, it is detectability. Burmese pythons are highly cryptic, spending much of their time motionless in concealed environments such as dense sawgrass, submerged wetlands, or underground burrows. Their coloration blends into the surrounding vegetation, and their ability to remain inactive for long periods after feeding reduces movement-based detection opportunities. Even experienced hunters may spend hours or days in the field without encountering a single snake. This leads to one of the most persistent challenges in management, the low detection-to-removal ratio. In practical terms, many more pythons are believed to be present in the environment than are ever visually or physically encountered. This imbalance is compounded by nocturnal activity patterns, seasonal shifts in movement, and the vast geographic scale of the Everglades ecosystem, which spans more than 6,000 square kilometers of wetlands and protected land. Field researchers and agencies working on python control consistently emphasize that removal alone cannot currently match reproduction and survival rates. Female Burmese pythons are capable of laying large clutches, often between 20 and over 100 eggs per reproductive cycle, with high hatchling survival in warm, predator-sparse conditions. Even with consistent removal efforts, new individuals are continually introduced into the detectable population through reproduction. Scientific consensus has therefore shifted toward a more cautious assessment. Eradication of Burmese pythons from the Everglades is not currently considered achievable with existing tools and methods. This conclusion is not based on a lack of effort, but on a combination of biological and environmental constraints. The species' cryptic behavior, reproductive capacity, and habitat accessibility create a system where complete elimination would require detection and removal at a scale that current technology does not support. Instead, management strategies have increasingly focused on population suppression and impact reduction rather than full eradication. This includes targeting breeding hotspots, improving detection technologies, and refining predictive models of movement and habitat use. Agencies such as the USGS and FWC continue to integrate field data from tagged snakes, removal records, and eDNA sampling into evolving models that attempt to map python distribution more accurately over time. At the operational level, the human presence in the Everglades has become more persistent and specialized. Contractors trained in nighttime detection patrol levees and access roads using thermal imaging, visual scanning techniques, and environmental familiarity built over years of field experience. These individuals often work in low-visibility conditions where snakes are detected only through subtle disturbances in vegetation, slight movement patterns, or thermal contrast. Yet even with increasing sophistication, we are searching an ecosystem designed to conceal. The Everglades is not just large, it is structurally complex, with water, vegetation, and seasonal change. It allows a single species to remain hidden across vast distances. Pythons exploit this structure with extreme efficiency. But what about the track that went silent? Well, that's a story of just how unpredictable this ecology is. The tracker went silent in the Everglades. What took down this apex python? In the Everglades, following the invasion of the pythons, Most interactions among the native fauna and the invaders are simply unknown to us. The case of a tagged Burmese python, later referred to as Loki, shows us just how little we know. Around the 2022 to 2023 reporting period, researchers working with the Conservancy of Southwest Florida were tracking multiple scout pythons fitted with GPS transmitters to study movement patterns in southern Florida's wetlands.
Because on the Conservancy of Southwest Florida's python tracking team, it means go time. Look around. They know one of their male scout snakes is near, tracked using radio transmitters, but can only hope there's more.
These animals were part of a structured monitoring program designed to map how invasive Burmese pythons navigate, hunt, and survive in a landscape where they have no historical predators. Loki's data stream initially followed expectations. The snake moved through typical Everglades terrain, slow shifts between marsh edges, occasional long stationary periods consistent with ambush behavior, and sporadic relocations tied to feeding cycles. Then, without warning, the signal stopped behaving like a living animal. The GPS point became fixed. Pythons rest for long periods, but they do not remain perfectly stationary in exposed conditions without environmental explanation. The research team flagged the location and initiated a recovery response. When scientists arrived at the GPS coordinate, they found something that immediately broke routine field expectations. The signal was accurate to the meter. Loki was exactly where the tracker said he was. But the condition of the animal told a different story. The carcass showed severe trauma to the cranial and cervical region, with the head either missing or heavily damaged. The body was partially concealed beneath scattered vegetation and debris, including pine needles and marsh cover that appeared to have been disturbed rather than naturally accumulated. In Everglades field research, concealment can mean scavenging behavior, predator caching, or environmental displacement after death. But the combination of precise head and neck damage and partial covering suggested a directed interaction rather than random decay or flooding. The python had not simply died in place, it had been altered after death. To investigate further, researchers deployed trail cameras around the site. Within hours of continuous monitoring, the footage captured a bobcat, Lynx rufus, entering the area and returning to the carcass site. It moved with no apparent hesitation, revisiting the remains as if aware of the location. This observation led to the primary scientific interpretation. The bobcat was either the predator responsible for the kill or a secondary scavenger returning to an already deceased animal. Field researchers, including those familiar with USGS-linked Everglades studies, categorized the event as an opportunistic interaction. The Loki case did not fit into any established pattern of adult python mortality in Florida datasets. Burmese pythons in the Everglades are typically documented dying from environmental stress, human removal programs, or occasional conflict with alligators. Mammalian predation on adult individuals is extremely rare and usually circumstantial. Bobcats have been documented consuming python eggs and, in rare cases, interacting with juvenile snakes in nest sites. These interactions were captured primarily through camera trap studies. A tracker goes silent inside the Everglades National Park. Researchers arrive at the exact GPS point and find a carcass with severe head and neck trauma, partially concealed under debris. The snake was likely stretched out, possibly digesting or thermoregulating, when a bobcat exploited its one vulnerable point, delivering a targeted bite behind the skull before the python could coil. The camera later captures the cat returning, consistent with either a successful ambush or opportunistic scavenging. Science supports the possibility, but not the pattern. Across decades of field data, adult python deaths from mammals remain isolated, not systemic. What is consistent is ecological pressure, collapsed prey populations, shifting predator behavior, and an invasive species still dominating the system. The Loki case doesn't reveal a new apex predator. It reveals a vast ecosystem where critical interactions happen beyond observation, and where we are still piecing together what is really going on. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.